All right. Hey everyone. Um, Happy Saturday, or it's Saturday for me. I don't know what day it is for you all. But welcome to our class on function of behavior. Won't take a long time. The expectation for responding to this is that there will be several questions throughout this recording that you'll end up responding to just in a Word doc, and then you'll submit that Word doc on Brightspace, in addition to doing the readings for the week. And I'll send this in an email as well, but the deadline for this I had originally been set at the Saturday after our Wednesday class, as we typically do. But given that I'm a little bit late on getting this webinar up, and that really, as long as you have this content before we meet in person next time, so not this upcoming Wednesday when we have our online class, but the following Wednesday, that's all that really matters. This information is going to be really important to have before our next class, but you can submit your response for this week's webinar by start of our next in-person class. So you essentially have a week and a half, so between now and then next Wednesday, to get this done. So I'll put that in an email as well, but I just want to make sure I'm really clear about that. So last week we were talking about how to define the behavior we're looking at and how to get a baseline measure of the behavior so that once we do put a plan in place, we have a way to see if our plan is working and if things are actually improving. All of that's really important. That's how we start the process. But that data and assessment information that we collect, that alone doesn't really tell us why the behavior is happening. So it doesn't give us a roadmap to how to create an effective plan. That's what we're talking about today. Today is the class on what information do we need to be gathering and looking at to try to figure out why the behavior is happening. Because why the behavior is happening is going to be what drives our entire intervention plan and approach to changing the behavior. So in behavior speak language, the why of the behavior is referred to as the function of the behavior. I'm sure it's something you've seen on behavior plans or heard your other coworkers or behavior specialists talk about. And so that's where that comes from, and that's what we're talking about today. And the premise for approaching behavior, really, as done through research and applied behavior analysis, the field of ABA and just schools in general have adopted this understanding and approach that challenging behavior occurs as a form of communication. So it's not just that the student's doing something to irritate us or to make our lives difficult or to distract others. They're communicating something about needing something or wanting to avoid something that they're not really able to effectively communicate in more appropriate ways. So behavior is a form of communication. We have to be coming at it through that lens if we're going to really understand what's going on. So not to just get upset by the behavior itself, but to really ask what is the student trying to communicate through exhibiting this behavior? What are they getting out of this? What are they trying to show me? Challenging behavior is serving cope. It's helping the student cope with something or helping them meet a need. It's probably not working for them in the most effective way possible because they're probably getting in trouble for it, but there is something that it's meeting for them, some need that's being met through exhibiting this behavior. And then related to that, the challenging behavior continues because in some ways it's working for the student. Again, it's not working in the most ideal way possible because the student's probably getting in trouble, and students don't want to be bad. They don't want to get in trouble. But it is working in some way in terms of they're lacking options to meet the same need as easily or as efficiently. So if a student is faced with really challenging work, yes, they could put in effort and try it. Or yes, they could ask the teacher for help, or they could ask someone else for help. But it's also possible that over years and experience, they have learned that the fastest and easiest way to cope with challenging work is to do something really disruptive and get sent out of the classroom. So no, it's not working for them in an ideal way, but it is meeting their need and requiring less energy and effort than doing something different that might be more desired or more adaptable for that student. So we need to be looking at what we're doing, what situations we're setting up for the students and how we're responding, because that's playing a role in this. If the behavior no longer works for the student, if it's no longer meeting a need for a student, then that's when we're going to see that behavior stopping. So that's what we really need to understand is like, what are they getting out of this? And so how can we structure things differently so that they actually have other effective ways to get that same need met in a way that's more appropriate, and that we're making sure that they're not being reinforced for the challenging behavior, which would cause it to then happen more often. When we look at, the function, our function really falls into two categories. So when you're actually just like looking at your behavior plan document itself, there is a section that says, what's the hypothesized function of behavior? And the hypothesized function is either going to be they're trying to access or obtain something, or they're trying to escape, avoid, or protest something. So it's going to be one of those two buckets, and then something more specific follows. So when it comes to access or obtain, a student's going to be exhibiting a behavior because they're trying to get attention, an activity, an object, or some sensory input. And so that's not an exhaustive list, but that pretty much covers most things. Or they're trying to avoid or escape something unpleasant, whether that's non-preferred work, negative interactions or conflicts with others, overstimulating environments, and then potentially in some trickier cases, and this is much harder to see and measure, but in some cases where there's really unclear trends and maybe more going on for the student, maybe they're acting out as a way to try to escape or avoid some unpleasant internal feelings. They're trying to cope with, something going on more internally, and that's not something we face quite as much. We are usually able to, at least notice something else going on, but there are some more difficult cases where that really is a factor. And so just putting that out there, if that might be related to something that your student is doing. So it's communicating a need, and it's communicating that they either want something or they want to escape or avoid something. Melanie, I'm thinking about your student with the toothache, and I'm sure that there's more going on with that, but, and thinking about some of his behaviors happen because of, wanting to escape or avoid pain, and maybe not being able to handle all the demands placed on him or communicate that his tooth hurts. And so he's actually maybe wanting some pain alleviation, whether that's like medicine or comfort, or just wanting to be left alone because any sort of, contact is actually painful. So anyways, and that might not cover everything, but it's just something to be thinking about. When it actually comes to then figuring out what the function is, how do we do that? We never really will know for sure what the function of a behavior is. We just can't see into a student's head like that, but we can collect data and information on the antecedent behavior and consequence, which we're going to talk about. And by looking at this sort of series of three events, something triggers the behavior happens, and then something for the student happens immediately afterwards. When we can track this enough, we start to see trends that lead us in the direction of making an informed hypothesis. Sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we have a hypothesis. We had good information. It made sense, but we're wrong, and that's okay. That happens. At least it's an informed hypothesis, and that's really the best that we can do. So ABC data is collected definitely through direct observation, but also can be done in some level from recollection, right? So maybe you're not able to observe right in the moment, but you can think back to what the ABC was earlier in the day or earlier in the week. Or maybe for a teacher, you can't be in their classroom seeing the behavior, but you're going to ask them to do their best to jot down or remember the antecedent behavior and consequence. Recollection is not as accurate and not as valid, so we don't want to rely on that exclusively, but it can be a way to fill in some of the gaps when direct observation isn't always feasible. Interviewing, too, we might not get really specific ABC data, but through asking, typically is going on in the classroom when the behavior happens? What's usually happening? What do you usually notice triggers the behavior? And then what usually is happening right when the behavior ends? Is the student getting sent to the office? Are they having to go sit in the corner of the classroom? Are they just kind of ignored? Like, is it a planned ignoring approach? So sort of interviewing parents and teachers can also help fill in the gaps as well, based on sort of a history of seeing these trends of antecedent behavior consequence. Setting events is not something we can necessarily directly observe and document in our ABC, but is still important to be thinking about and just aware of. So this is going to be anything that's kind of setting up the student to be more or less likely to engage in the behavior. So again, it could be that they happen to have a toothache that day, and so they're just more easily triggered. Maybe they're sick or they didn't get a good night's sleep. Maybe there's, changes at home, and with custody situations, they're switching between homes, and so that could be a setting event that coming into the school day, that alone kind of lets you know if something's more or less likely to happen. Not a direct part of this ABC, but just kind of always floating all around it and influencing it in some way, and an important piece for us to be thinking about and considering when we're interviewing teachers and parents and talking to the student and just trying to piece together this puzzle of why the behavior is happening. We also want to be thinking about some of these external factors that might be going on at home or regarding just health and well-being that can be factoring into this. So what is the antecedent? The antecedent is basically whatever's going on in the environment right before the behavior happens. So like, what's triggering the behavior to occur? We might not know the exact trigger, but we can at least describe what's happening in the classroom or in the school setting when the behavior happens. So maybe it's that a classroom activity is presented and the student's expected to write an essay, or they're expected to fill out a math worksheet or take a test. Maybe they're given the class is given a direction or a prompt to transition or to do something, take out your homework. Peer interactions or adult interactions, adult feedback, or sensory experiences. So are the loudspeakers on? Is a fire alarm going off? Is the student in a really crowded classroom where there's actually a lot of peers and they don't have a lot of physical space? So all of those could potentially be triggers. We don't know what the actual one trigger is, but by writing down a pretty comprehensive view of the antecedent for a behavior, we can start to notice trends. So when you're jotting down the antecedent, you're looking at, what classroom are they in? What is the classroom environment like? Is it overstimulating? Is it overcrowded? Or is it highly structured? And then what was the student being asked to do, or what feedback were they being given in that moment as well? And that all will come together to be our antecedents. Then we have the behavior. So what does the student actually do? What does the behavior look like? We'll have an idea of the behavior because we've operationally defined it, but we want to be jotting down in the moment, in that particular incident, that ABC incident, what behavior happened. And keep in mind that this is looking at what the student does, not what they don't do. So it can be really easy to say that the behavior was that they didn't do their work, or the behavior was they didn't follow the direction. And that's important, but it doesn't really tell us what they did do. So instead, it's going to be important to get a little bit more specific there and say, instead of the student didn't do their work, the student sat in their seat staring out the window, or sat in their seat texting on their phone. Instead of, they didn't follow the direction, were they verbally defiant? Did they argue back? Did they say no? Or did they just kind of sit there looking spacey, like they weren't paying attention? So be thinking about what the student actually is doing. What are the measurable, observable behaviors? How long did it last? How bad was it? What ended the behavior? Was it that the teacher walked over and put her hand on the desk and said, hey, pay attention? All of that factors into the behavior. And then the consequence is what happens right after the behavior. Maybe that is also the teacher coming up and putting her hand on the desk and saying, hey, pay attention. There might be more to it, though. Consequence is interesting because we tend to have this notion that consequence equals negative. Consequence equals punishment. And when it comes to an ABC trend of an antecedent behavior consequence, that's not what we mean. By consequence, we really just mean what happened for the student right after the challenging behavior. Were they sent to the office? Did they get a laugh out of the class, or did someone next to them smile and giggle? Did the teacher redirect them? Were they ignored and nothing at all happened? Were they sent to another classroom? So it could be things that might seem positive are happening. Consequence could also be, if we're looking at antecedent behavior consequence, it could be, positive behaviors, and the consequence is that they're getting praise or rewards. So the consequence is just what happens for the student after they exhibit this behavior. So not necessarily a negative thing, but the consequence is a huge piece in that whatever our consequence is might actually be reinforcing the behavior, even inadvertently, and causing that behavior to be more likely to occur in the future. This is what some ABC data might look like. It's not tally marks, it's not, times or anything like that. It's more of this narrative format of what was going on right before, what did the behavior look like, what did people do afterwards. So I just go into a classroom with a piece of paper, and I draw a little chart like this and write ABC, and then just jot things down as they happen. And by looking at this, we would need to have enough behavior incidents that we've seen and that we've documented this for in order to really know or be able to guess the function, but we can start to get an idea by breaking this down. So, for example, teacher hands out a math worksheet with word problems. Student verbally defies the teacher, says he's not going to do it, and, F you. And so then the consequence is that the teacher sends the student to the next door classroom, says, you can't be in here. If you're going to be defiant and use that language, you need to leave, go next door. Okay. We don't know for sure what the function is. This is just one incident, but it would lead me to believe that this function might be avoidance. They might be avoiding work that is too difficult for them or that just requires a lot of effort, right? Because the antecedent is being given work. So that's number one clue that, okay, if the behavior is happening right after they're given work, maybe this is to avoid work. But clue number two is that the student succeeds in getting out of this work. They get sent out to another classroom. So that piece also is really important and tells me maybe this really is avoidance, because that's what's happening for the student. They're getting an opportunity to escape. Wouldn't jump to that conclusion based off of, like I said, one incident alone, but would factor into kind of the bigger picture. Another example, student goes outside to recess, wants to maybe join a basketball game. This wasn't a very, comprehensive antecedent, but I'm just filling in the gaps. Wants to join a basketball game and is told no, our team's full. So the student is crying and yelling and throwing a tantrum out at recess. Teacher comes over, talks to the kid, calms him down, talks to the other boys, and helps that student reintegrate into the basketball game. So, thinking that maybe this is more of an attention related, wanting to get attention, wanting to get help. So they're crying and they're yelling because they want to be part of this game with peers, and because crying and yelling gets the teacher to come over and gets the student help. It could also be, access an activity, right? So it might not just be get adult attention and get adult help. That could be it. Could be that, they're just wanting to access basketball, and every day they want to play basketball, and if they can't, they throw a tantrum. So that's where you need more information to really figure out, are they acting out and crying and yelling because that's how they get help from an adult, or are they acting out and crying and yelling because they really want to do this one activity, and that when they do that, someone comes over and gets them into the activity. So could be one or the other, could be both. We would need a little bit more information, but these would be the questions I would start to think about as I collected more data through observation and through talking to the recess staff and talking to other people who know the students. So we're going to watch a really short video now, and I want you to be thinking about, what would you write down if you had this chart here, this ABC chart, what would you write down was the antecedent in this video, what would you write down was the behavior, and what would you write down as the consequence? And then be thinking about what the function might actually be. So, okay. This is like, pay attention because it goes really fast.
Okay, it's time to finish.
No.
All right, looks like you're not done. Let's do 5 more minutes, then it's finished.
Okay, we're gonna do it one more time.
Okay, it's time to finish.
No.
All right, looks like you're not done. Let's do 5 more minutes, then it's finished.
Okay. Oh, I don't want to listen to that again. So, what would be the A, the B, and the C from this video? For antecedent, hopefully you caught that the antecedent was the mom coming in and saying, time to finish on your computer game. The behavior was the daughter being, verbally defiant and saying no. And then the consequence was the mom said, okay, seems like you're not done, 5 more minutes. So in this case, it's pretty clear that we have our ABC, and that we would anticipate the function here is that the student is, or the child wanting, access to their computer game. So the function is like access preferred activity, and that in this case, the consequence was really reinforcing the behavior. She wants access to the computer game, and when she says no, guess what happens? She gets more access to her computer game. So bad example, not what we want to be doing, but a good way to see how it's not just the trigger that's important to pay attention to, right? The trigger here was stop your video game or stop your computer game. The consequence is equally important to pay attention to, because that is definitely playing a role into why this behavior is continuing. Yeah, of course, for this girl, why should she just say okay and close her computer when she can say no and get more time on it, right? Of course she's going to, in this case, be defiant and say no because it's working for her really well. So consequences can be reinforcing. Consequences often are reinforcing. If they weren't, then this behavior wouldn't be continuing. So this is where these patterns come into play. As a student has learned, maybe subconsciously, just over time, that when they exhibit a certain behavior, they get their needs met in some way. So we need to be really aware of that, and that's part of why we do a functional behavior assessment, is to look at not just what skills do we need to teach the student, but what are we maybe accidentally doing that's making the situation worse. So again, we can't necessarily determine the function from, one simple observation. Sometimes we can, sometimes it's pretty easy, but we really need to be looking at trends. We want to be talking to the parent, talking to the other teachers, and seeing the student multiple times, or having other teachers kind of document ABC, so that we can establish that there's a clear trend, and a trend in both the antecedent and the consequence. It's really tempting to just pay attention to the triggers and to try to figure everything out based on the triggers, but we also get a lot of information from looking at trends in the consequence. So, for example, trends that you might notice. This isn't going to be, totally comprehensive, but pretty common things we see. So if the function, this is like backwards mapping a little bit, we're going to start with the function and then look at what the antecedent or consequence usually is. If the function is to seek objects or activities, you're often going to find that the antecedent is being denied access to what you want. Being told you have to stop doing an activity like what we just saw, or being told, no, you can't have cake right now. No, it's not time to be reading or to be on phones. No, you don't get to go on the computer today. So if the antecedent is often being told no or being denied access to something, pretty common bet that the function is going to be, that the student is really seeking that activity. If the student is seeking attention from peers or adults, we're actually going to really notice that a lot more in the consequences than maybe the antecedents, because we're going to see that whenever the student acts out, they're getting some form of attention. probably negative attention, but attention nonetheless. So it could be that when they act out, the class is laughing and thinking that they're funny, and or the teacher stops the lesson and calls that student out in front of the whole class or something like that. So if we're seeing a consequence of attention being given, it would at least cause us to stop and think, I wonder if the function might be attention seeking. If the function sensory input, we're just going to observe definitely behaviors that indicate that the student is really seeking movement, pressure, sensory input. So for students on the autism spectrum, we would see stimming, which might be hand flapping, rocking back and forth, fidgeting with clothing, something that's really self-stimulatory, moving around a lot, or preoccupation with certain activities. So if the behavior involves a lot of movement or stimming, we might want to think about, maybe the function is seeking sensory input. When it comes to, turn the page, I have to get this in the right spot for it to move. There we go. Friends, we might notice when it comes to escape avoid, if the function is to escape or avoid a certain activity, of course, we're going to see that the antecedent is that activity being given or being initiated, or that when the student exhibits the behavior, the activity is maybe removed. So they're throwing a tantrum, they're being defiant, whatever, and then the teacher gives them an alternative task to work on, or sends them to another classroom, or sends them to the office. All of that would clue us in that it's possible that the function is to escape or avoid that activity that was going on. When it comes to escaping or avoiding peer conflicts or just unpleasant interactions, we're going to see that coming up in the antecedent, that usually this behavior is happening when the student is interacting with a particular person, or it's at lunch or at recess where there's a lot of, interacting going on that's maybe causing conflicts. And if the function is to escape or avoid sensory stimulation, we're going to notice that a consequence for them maybe is that they do get removed from the room or the situation, and then that might actually be really reinforcing for them. If it's a rally or an assembly and it's loud and it's chaotic and it's crazy and the student starts to have a meltdown and they get taken out to go somewhere else, go somewhere more quiet, pretty good indicator that they were trying to escape or avoid that sensory overstimulation. We'll notice that in the antecedents as well, that the behavior usually happens maybe in more crowded or loud contexts and less likely to happen in small group or quiet situations, or that the student's actually just trying to do something to block the stimulation. They're covering their ears and squealing, and making noises or something like that. So if we're seeing students do that, that also indicates to us that they're trying to escape or avoid sensory input. So we get all of this through observing the students and us writing down ABC that we're seeing, from asking, other teachers to do the same and to talk to other teachers and parents about general trends they notice. But what if we're still not sure, it's unclear, or we just want more information? We have this tool called the Motivational Assessment Scale, which I'm going to upload, that can give us a little bit more guidance. And this is isn't meant to be used as a standalone tool, but just to supplement the other data that we get. So it's a pretty brief questionnaire. It's 16 questions, and you or the other teacher, whoever would fill it out based on what they notice with the students. So, does the behavior occur following a request to perform a difficult task? Never, seldom, usually, always. 6-point rating scale. So you could have all of the different teachers fill this out. You could just have the paraeducator do it, just one person. It doesn't matter. It's just a way to get more data. And then what you do down here, you pull down the scores. So number 1, whatever the student was rated for number 1, you'd put that number here. If they were rated always, you'd put a 6. Then you look at number 2, maybe they were rated half the time, so you put a 3. So you bring all the numbers down, and then you add up each column. So for sensory, you're adding up the responses for numbers 1, 5, 9, and 13. Then you do escape, attention, and tangible. Tangible just being some, physical hands-on object or activity. So computer, phone, food, toy, all of those would be tangibles. And then you look to see which category was rated the highest, and that gives you some more information about what the function might be. If escape is rated by far the highest, and that, confirms what you saw in your ABC data as well, it gives you a really good estimate that the function of the student's behavior is to escape or avoid something. Sometimes you'll notice that there are two that are both rated really high. That totally happens. It's actually, really common that there's maybe more than one function playing into a behavior, and so it can be really hard to tease apart. We do what we can through observations and things like this to get the best idea, but sometimes we will acknowledge on the behavior plan that there actually are more than one function, that a student is becoming disruptive in class as a way to escape work, but it also gets them access to more teacher help and support, and that those two things are both really strong, and so we can't necessarily say it's just one or just the other. So just know that it doesn't have to be that we only have one function and we have to find the one column here with the most. That you might have more than one. You might have two top contenders, and that's all right too. So I'm going to upload this to Brightspace, and it's not something that's going to be required for you to use on your case study assignment student, but I would recommend it. I think it's helpful. It's a really quick, easy tool, and it can give a little bit of extra peace of mind, especially if you're not quite sure of the function. So something that I am going to have you do as part of your response to this class is to pull up the reading chapter that you did for this week. There was 3 of them, but there was the full chapter called Providing Tier 3 Behavior Interventions. Between pages 166 and 179, there were 2 case studies that talked a little bit about the student, shows some sample ABC data and some like frequency and time of day data, and then kind of explains or interprets that. And what I want you to do is pick one of those case studies, not both, just one. You can pick whichever one you want. And in reading the case and in looking at the ABC data, pull out how they made this determination of function. What were the trends that you noticed in that data that support a function of escape avoid or access obtain? So just a brief summary of, why the authors came to that conclusion and what you noticed in the data itself. So when it comes to how to actually do this data collection for ABC, you can be doing this while you're collecting your frequency and duration or whatever it is that you're going to do. You don't have to do all of them, but say you're going to do a frequency data on a student and you're going to observe them for 30 minutes. You can be tallying up when the behaviors happen and then at the same time jotting down the ABC. So direct observation is going to be the best and the most accurate way to get that, but you can't be shadowing a student all day every day to catch every incident, right? If you have a behavior specialist, that might be what they do, but for you and for your case study student or just for students in general who you kind of want to figure out the function, you're not going to have that luxury. So rely on other people to help you. Something that I often do is put together a shared Google Excel sheet and have whoever's interacting with the student that day, whether it's paraeducator, special ed teacher, gen ed teacher, whoever, fill that in with the ABC data that they see. You can give other teachers just a hard copy piece of paper with that ABC chart, just those 3 columns, and just have them jot things down. Google Forms. So I have some things pulled up here, right? So here's an Excel sheet. This is maybe a little bit more in depth, but it kind of captures more of the frequency and time sampling data. So, and actually this one gets intensity too. So this chart gets at a lot of things. So we kind of leveled out the intensity. 0 is in this case, like appropriate positive behavior. 1 would be sort of a minor version of the misbehavior, and 2 would be a bigger version of the misbehavior. And then it's broken into 30-minute increments of during that half hour, what was the level of behavior reached? If they were good the whole time, it's a 0. If they just had a little bit of a problem, a 1. And if they had a big outburst, it would be a 2. And so the idea with this is that you're getting a sense of how often the big behaviors are happening. So on this day, it happened twice or during 2, increments of time. little behavior has happened, 4 times, and that it really seems isolated to this 8:30 to 10 o'clock block and 11:30 to 1, and other times of the day are fine. So we get frequency, we get some level of duration, and we get intensity all with this. You're welcome to use this if you want to. You definitely don't have to. The narrative, strategies that worked or don't work, that have not worked. But here's the ABC part. So we set up here, if a bigger behavior happens, jot down the A, the B, and the C, and you could put a sample in, but the teacher would just put their name, what was going on, what was the trigger, what was happening in the classroom, what did the student do, and then how did people respond. And with everyone contributing to this, after a couple days or a week or two, you might actually have a good list of maybe 5 or 6 or more behavior sequences, and that gives you a lot of information. Another thing that I sometimes do is a Google form, and at the end of each day, send out a Google form, have people fill it in, and then do that for a week, and by the end of the week, you have, a lot of information. This one covers some additional things as well that you might not do, but, what was your best guess at how academically engaged, time off task, leaving the space, so you get some of that frequency count type stuff too. And then here we have, essentially, this is the version of the ABC. So if any unsafe behaviors happened, what was going on in the classroom right before, how did the team respond, what worked, what didn't work. So you kind of get a sense of, even without using ABC language, you get that same information. And then get a bunch of responses and notes that can be really helpful to help piece together what the function of the behavior might be. Here's a really basic ABC chart. Let me zoom in a little bit with some, and it has the person actually kind of guess the possible function of behavior, and kind of seeing what other people are thinking and assuming can be helpful, either because they're right or maybe because they're really off mark, and something that we would want to be aware of. So, I'll upload these to Brightspace as well. You do not have to use these for your case study assignment, but you definitely can. You can make copies or steal any of this and do what is going to be most efficient and most helpful for you. The one other thing sometimes, especially for people who are not going to be as cooperative with filling out data sheets or notes every day or for a couple days, is at the end of the week, check in with a couple people and, ask them to summarize the 1 or 2 most significant events that occurred that week. It's of course not going to be as accurate. They might not have really paid attention to what the consequences were or what the triggers were, but you can still use that to get an idea and to fill in any gaps that maybe are missing. So then here's a sample case. This was from a student in the same class last year at this time, and this was kind of a summary of her ABC for her student, and I want you to be thinking about, and in your response, write up what you think the function might be for the student and why. There's not necessarily one right or wrong answer, but we'll start our next class by talking about this case and what this particular student, what conclusions she came to and what she did about it. So the antecedent for this student was, so I'll start with this. The behavior was really that he would just not engage in work and was really just off task and couldn't get started on his work. So that was the behavior. The antecedent was, he was a pretty good kid, pretty compliant and everything, and we really just saw this behavior when independent work was given out. It was like whole class instruction. He was a little bit more engaged and would participate, but when worksheets were passed out and everyone was expected to do independent work, off task, no engagement, not getting started, not even putting his name on the paper or anything. So in analyzing the consequences, the student noted that typically after she had passed out papers to everyone, kind of checked in on people and looked around, she would notice that he was just sitting there staring out the window, fidgeting with his pencil, and she would go over to him and get him started on his assignment. And so that was the typical consequence. So be thinking about what you think the function might be and why. I know this doesn't give you a ton of information, but should get the juices flowing a little bit, and we'll talk more about this case when we meet next time. So that's pretty much it for today. What you're going to be doing is, again, pick that one case study from the book chapter reading, how did they determine the function? What was their evidence that they collected? And then also, what do you think the function is in that sample case we just talked about from that student from last year? Write up both of those things, just type it up in a Word doc and submit it on Brightspace. If you're having issues with submitting things on Brightspace, this is the first time in our class I'm having you submit something on there. If you're struggling with it, you can always email me your response too. I would like to get to a place where we are able to submit things on Brightspace. I think it'll make just grading and everything much easier and more streamlined, but especially for this first one, don't worry and don't struggle with it. I don't want you to put too much of your time into just trying to submit. And yeah, and we will open our class next week by talking about some of these things in more depth. I'll upload those resources to Brightspace, and I will see you all in a week and a half. I hope you have a really good weekend, and yeah, I'll see you soon. All right, bye.